Have you ever woken up one morning, looked around and wondered, is this really all there is? I've asked myself that question hundreds of times. But then I'd shake my head, convincing myself that stability is its own kind of happiness. My life had no grand twists, no dramatic relationships, no impulsive decisions leading to disastrous consequences. It was just me, my books, and the perfectly predictable repetition of each day. My name is Claire Robinson. I'm 31 years old, and if you're looking for an extraordinary story filled with epic adventures or passionate love affairs, mine is probably not what you want to hear. But if you want to know how an ordinary woman got swept into a whirlwind she never saw coming, then stick around. I work at the Crestwood Public Library, a small place tucked away in the quiet fields of the Midwest. It's not a glamorous job, but I love it. The towering bookshelves covered in dust, the faint scent of old paper in the air, the soft rustling of pages turning, it all makes me feel safe. I like the order of this place. No one expects much from a librarian. I don't have to try to be interesting or force myself to fit in. My days follow a simple routine. Wake up at 6:30 a.m., make a strong cup of coffee, throw on my favorite worn-out cardigan, and walk to the library. I work until 5 p.m., putting books back in their proper places, after someone has carelessly misplaced them, sometimes helping a child find their favorite storybook. Then, I return to my small third-floor apartment in an old building, the only place I truly feel I belong. Friends? I have a few, but none too close. Most are married with kids, wrapped up in family gatherings on weekends. Things I don't have, and I'm not even sure I want. Romantic relationships? Never a priority. I've dated a few times, but no one ever had the patience to understand someone like me. And I never felt the need to change just to please someone else. I'm not lonely. At least, that's what I keep telling myself. I have books to keep me company, imaginary worlds to escape into whenever reality becomes too heavy. I don't need anything else. Or maybe, I just want to believe that. But life has a way of shaking things up, even for those who think they have everything under control. And I was about to learn that in a way I never expected. That day started like any other. I arrived at the library earlier than usual, unlocked the doors, turned on the soft yellow lights, and slowly walked through the aisles, checking if any books were out of place. Everything was in its proper order, just the way I liked it. Quiet, predictable. But the silence didn't last long. Around midday, as I was focused on updating the list of new arrivals, a voice spoke from behind me. "Excuse me, could you help me find a book?" I turned around and nearly startled. Standing in front of me was a tall man, relaxed in posture but carrying an effortless confidence, the kind of confidence I wasn't used to. "What genre are you looking for?" I asked, keeping my voice as steady as always. "I'm not sure. Anything you think is worth reading." He smiled. A casual, easy smile, with a hint of playfulness, as if he was waiting to see how I would react. I narrowed my eyes slightly, wondering if this was some kind of joke. No one came to the library asking a stranger to pick out a book for them. But his gaze held no trace of amusement, just curiosity. I cleared my throat, pushing away the unexpected awkwardness bubbling inside me. "Well, do you prefer fiction or nonfiction?" "Surprise me." I nodded, took a step back, and turned toward the classic literature section. I pulled a book off the shelf and handed it to him. "Try this one." He took it, flipped through a few pages, then looked up at me, his green eyes lighting up as if he had just discovered something intriguing. "Thanks, Claire." "Thanks, Claire, I'm Jack. Jack Sullivan." Jack Sullivan. His name echoed in my mind as he walked out of the library with the book in his hand. I assumed, like most visitors, he would read it and disappear. I was wrong. The next day Jack came back. The book was great. "Got any other recommendations?" He leaned against the counter, his interest in me unmistakable. I handed him another book, then the next day, and the day after that. Jack didn't just come for the books. He came to talk. At first, our conversations revolved around literature. But gradually, they expanded. Small stories, personal interests, things that made us laugh. Jack had a way of making any topic engaging, as if he could turn even the most mundane subject into something fascinating. He carried the confidence of someone who wasn't afraid of being misunderstood. And most importantly, he listened. In a way no one ever had before. I didn't know what drew him to me, a quiet librarian with nothing special except a room full of books. But his attention never felt forced or fake. 1 week passed, then 2, then 3. I grew used to Jack's presence, to the point that, on the day he didn't show up, I found myself staring blankly at my computer screen, realizing I was waiting for him. And I wasn't sure if that was a good thing, because I had never let anyone into my life so easily before. But somehow, Jack Sullivan had. I once thought that marrying Jack was the best decision of my life. He came into it like a fresh breeze, pulling me out of the monotonous loop of my old routine. Jack made me laugh, made me feel special, and, most importantly, he listened to me. After a year of dating, his proposal came naturally, sincere yet effortless. And I said yes without a moment of hesitation. Our wedding was held on a warm autumn afternoon. Nothing extravagant, just a cozy ceremony with a few close friends. I believed in what we had, convinced that marriage would only make things better. But I was wrong. The first signs of change came slowly, like cold drafts slipping through the cracks of a window. Subtle yet enough to make me shiver. Jack was no longer the gentle man I had known. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but little by little, I started noticing the distance in his eyes, the indifferent remarks and, most of all, the silence when I needed him the most. At first I thought it was just work stress, temporary exhaustion, but then I realized these weren't fleeting moments, they were becoming the norm. And then there was his family. I had met them a few times before the wedding, but our interactions had been nothing more than polite small talk. After the wedding, everything changed. "Claire, have you thought about getting a real job?" Margaret, Jack's mother, asked during a family dinner. I set my fork down, keeping my expression neutral. "The library is a real job, Mother." "Oh, of course," she smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "But you know, Jack has such a promising career. A man needs a wife who can support him, not someone who spends her days lost in books." I glanced at Jack, hoping he would say something. But he simply kept his head down, focusing on his plate. As if he hadn't heard a thing. That night, for the first time, I felt like a stranger in my own home. Jack's father, Richard, rarely voiced his opinions as openly as Margaret. But his disapproval was just as evident. He would ignore my comments during dinner, or chuckle quietly whenever Margaret said something condescending toward me. Things only got worse when they started showing up unannounced. One afternoon, I came home from the library and found Margaret standing in my kitchen, her coat draped over the chair like she had lived there for years. "Oh, Claire, you're home. I was just tidying up a little, the house was a bit messy." I tightened my grip on my bag, forcing myself to stay calm. "Since when do you have a key to my house?" "Jack gave it to me. Just in case." She smiled, smug and satisfied. I turned to Jack, waiting for an explanation, but he simply shrugged. "It's not a big deal, Claire. Mom just wants to help." But I knew. This wasn't help. This was control. And the worst part was that Jack wasn't on my side. Each passing day, I felt more and more like a guest in my own marriage. Bit by bit, I was being pushed to the sidelines, turned into an outsider in the life I once believed was mine. I had thought Jack was the only person who truly saw me in my quiet world. But now, I realized, he had never really seen me at all. I remember that day so clearly. The sky was gray, heavy clouds looming over the town, but I still felt happy. Jack and I had been engaged for a week. I was never one to believe in fairy tale weddings or love stories drenched in romance. But when Jack knelt before me, ring in hand, his eyes filled with certainty, I didn't hesitate. We were going to build a life together, that was all that mattered. But then, like a slap of reality, that conversation happened. Claire, I need to talk to you about something important. Jack's voice was unusually serious as we sat on my small apartment's couch. I remember how he didn't quite meet my eyes when he said it. What is it? I asked, my heartbeat quickening with an uneasy feeling I couldn't name. He pulled out a folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table in front of me. My parents. They want us to sign a prenuptial agreement. I blinked, the words feeling so foreign that it took me a moment to process what he had just said. A prenup? I repeated, my voice sounding distant, almost detached. It's just a formality, Claire, Jack rushed to explain, his tone careful, almost too light. My parents are very cautious when it comes to finances. I don't care about it, but they do. They think that if we sign it now, it'll prevent any issues down the line. I stared at the papers before me, my fingers absently tracing the edge of the folder. What do you think about this? Jack was silent for a moment before letting out a small sigh. I don't care about money, Claire. I love you. And I want to marry you. But if this will give my parents peace of mind, then what's the harm? I bit my lip, my eyes locked on the first page of the contract. I had never cared about Jack's money. I had no idea how wealthy his family was, and frankly, I never needed to know. I loved him for the late-night conversations, for the way he made me laugh, for the evenings he patiently listened to me talk about the books I adored. Money had never crossed my mind. But in that moment, as I stared at the contract in front of me, a realization hit me with absolute clarity. They didn't trust me. Who did Jack's family think I was? Some gold digger, a woman waiting for the right moment to take everything if things went wrong? I took a deep breath. I didn't want a stupid contract standing between Jack and me. I didn't want to make this a bigger issue than it had to be. So, I picked up the pen and signed on the blank line at the bottom. Done. My voice was steady, controlled. Jack looked at me for a moment before reaching out, gently squeezing my hand. Thank you, Claire. I know this wasn't easy. I gave him a small smile, but something inside me had already begun to crack. I didn't tell Jack that the moment I signed that paper, another thought had crept into my mind. If he truly loved me, if he truly trusted me, then why did we need this at all? I can't remember the last time I felt at peace. Life with Jack had become suffocating. His parents' unannounced visits, their scrutinizing stares, the subtle yet pointed remarks, they all made me feel like a stranger in my own home. Jack, who had once been my emotional anchor, had become distant. Every time I tried to talk about what was happening, he would shake his head and tell me I was being too sensitive. I endured it. I kept telling myself that love was more important than these small conflicts. But my body didn't agree. It started with occasional headaches, then dizziness. Each day I felt more exhausted. The endless nights of insomnia drained me, and no matter how hard I tried, I felt like I was drifting further away from my own marriage. And then, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, I collapsed, right in the middle of the library. When I opened my eyes, the bright white lights of the hospital ceiling made me squint. The first thing I felt was pain, a dull, aching sensation spreading through my body. I tried to remember what had happened, but everything was a blur. Miss Robinson, how are you feeling? I turned my head to see a middle-aged doctor standing by my bed, his face carrying a mix of concern and professionalism. What's wrong with me? My voice was dry, barely above a whisper. You've suffered from severe exhaustion. Prolonged stress and pressure have taken a toll on your health. He studied me for a moment before continuing in a gentler tone. You need to rest. More importantly, you need to remove yourself from whatever is causing this decline. I let out a dry chuckle. So I need to escape my own life? The doctor said nothing, just gave me a knowing look before quietly leaving the room. I leaned back into the pillows, trying to take a deep breath, when a knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. I turned, expecting to see Jack, or worse, his mother. But the person who entered was a complete stranger. A man in a well-tailored suit, carrying a leather briefcase, stood at the foot of my bed. His expression calm, but serious. "Are you Claire Robinson?" His voice was firm, but not unkind. "Yes. Who are you?" I sat up slowly, an uneasy feeling creeping in. The man set his briefcase down on the small table beside my bed and opened it, pulling out a folder. "My name is David Lancaster. I'm the legal representative of Mr. Henry Caldwell." I frowned. "Who is that?" David hesitated slightly, as if surprised by my question. "Henry Caldwell was your uncle." My heartbeat quickened. That name. I hadn't heard it in over 15 years. Henry was my mother's younger brother, a peculiar and reclusive man. He had cut ties with the family a long time ago, and to be honest, I had no idea if he was even alive. David took a slow breath before continuing. "I'm sorry to inform you that Mr. Caldwell passed away 2 weeks ago." I didn't know how to react. Someone I once knew, but had been absent from my life for so long, was suddenly being spoken of in past tense. But David wasn't finished. "Before he passed, he left his entire estate to you." I blinked, thinking I had misheard him. "I'm sorry. What did you just say?" David flipped through the folder and pulled out a document. "Mr. Caldwell left a will, in which he bequeathed to you an inheritance worth $15 million, along with shares in 3 major companies. Additionally, you are now the owner of a mansion on the outskirts of New York, and a collection of valuable antique paintings and furniture." I sat there, completely frozen. $15 million, company shares, a mansion. Was this some kind of joke? David kept talking about legal procedures, but I couldn't hear him anymore. My mind had latched onto one single thought. My life just changed. Forever. Jack arrived at the hospital the next morning. I had expected an argument, a flood of questions about my health. But no. The first thing he said when he stepped into the room was, "I heard you just received a massive inheritance." I stared at him, a mix of shock and bitterness rising in my chest. "So the news spreads fast, huh?" I replied, unable to hide the sarcasm in my voice. Jack let out a small chuckle and stepped closer to my bed, but the warmth in his eyes was gone. Instead, there was something else. Calculation. A kind of scrutiny I had never seen in him before. $15 million, company shares, a mansion. "Claire, this is huge," he said as he sat down in the chair beside me. I crossed my arms, leaning back against the pillows. "Is that so? But tell me, did you come here to check on my health? Or to ask about my money?" Jack forced a smile, but I could see the discomfort behind it. "Of course I care about you, it's just, this changes things. We're married, Claire. Our life is going to be different now. You may not realize it, but this affects both of us." I felt anger simmering beneath my ribs. "It affects both of us? Or are you just wondering how much of it will benefit you?" Jack raised an eyebrow, pretending to be hurt. "What are you saying? I've never cared about money between us." I said nothing. Just watched him. Waiting. Jack sighed, then reached for my hand. "Listen, Claire. This could be a great opportunity for us to start a family." I froze. Start a family? "I know you weren't ready before, but now things are different. You have the resources to raise a child, to give them the best life. We can begin right away." I yanked my hand away from his. "You mean I should have a baby immediately? Just as soon as I found out I'm rich?" Jack's face remained calm, but I noticed his fingers clenching into a small fist. "That's not what I meant, but let's be realistic, Claire. We're married. Having children is the natural next step. Besides..." He paused before continuing in a softer tone. "My mother thinks so too." I let out a dry, humorless laugh. "So Margaret is part of this plan too?" Jack didn't deny it, he just stared at me, as if waiting to see how I'd react. Suddenly, everything became painfully clear. I wasn't just Jack's wife. I was a tool. A means to ensure that this fortune remained within his family. They didn't want me to have a child out of love, or because we wanted to build a future together. They wanted to tie me to them permanently, to make sure I could never leave, never escape their control. I felt sick. Not from my condition, but from the sheer deception standing in front of me. Get out, Jack. He frowned. What? I said, get out, I need to rest. Jack stared at me for a long moment, as if debating whether to argue. But then, he stood up. Claire, think about this. We could have a beautiful family. You just need to see things in a more positive way. I didn't respond. I just looked at him, waiting. Finally, Jack let out a sigh, took a step back, and walked out of the room. The moment the door clicked shut, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I wouldn't let them control my life any longer. And this time I wouldn't give them the chance to. Jack came home that evening, but I didn't wait for him to talk. I had spent the entire afternoon in the hospital, thinking about everything. How he and his family had treated me, the control they tried to exert, the way Jack suddenly pushed for a baby right after I inherited the money. And I had made my decision. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me for another second. When I walked through the door, Jack was sitting on the couch, his phone in hand, but the moment he saw me, he quickly stood up. Claire, you're home, I made some soup for you. We need to talk. I cut him off. Jack hesitated, clearly uneasy with the coldness in my tone. What's wrong? You're still not feeling well, don't stress yourself out. I took a deep breath, straightened my back, and met his gaze. I want a divorce. The air in the room turned to ice. Jack stared at me as if he had misheard. What? I want a divorce, Jack. I've had enough. His face went pale before quickly shifting into anger. Claire, what the hell are you talking about? We've been married for less than 2 years. You can't just say you want a divorce like it's nothing. I smirked. It's not me, Jack. It's you and your family. From the beginning, I was never seen as a wife. Just a tool. A puppet for all of you to control. You don't love me. You love the idea that I would always be tied to you. Jack let out a dry laugh, but I saw the flicker of panic in his eyes. You're being emotional, Claire. You need to calm down and think this through. We can start over. I crossed my arms, my voice like ice. Start over? When? After I have a baby so I can never leave? After you and your mother control every cent I own? Jack gritted his teeth, his patience clearly running thin. Claire, do you hear yourself? You really think I only care about your money? I met his eyes without hesitation. Yes. A heavy silence fell between us. I walked over to the table, opened my bag, and pulled out a folder. I placed it down in front of him. Do you remember this? Jack stared at it, then his expression changed as he recognized what it was. The prenuptial agreement his family had insisted I sign. I smiled. Not the timid smile of the woman I used to be, but one filled with quiet victory. You and your family were so proud of making me sign this, weren't you? To protect your wealth from me? I pushed the folder toward him. Well, guess what, Jack? This also protects me from you. Jack opened the folder and scanned the document. I watched as his anger built, the reality of the situation sinking in. He knew. According to the agreement, everything I owned, including my inheritance, belonged solely to me. Jack had no claim to a single cent. And since he had never contributed financially to our marriage, he wasn't entitled to anything from the divorce. Not a penny. You thought you were smart when you forced me to sign it. My voice was cold. But in the end, it's the very thing that leaves you with nothing. Jack shot up from his chair, his face red with rage. Claire, you can't do this. I'm your husband. You were never really my husband, I said firmly, my voice carrying a finality that left no room for argument. I picked up my bag and turned toward the door. I've already hired a lawyer. The divorce papers will be sent to you soon. And I hope we never see each other again. Jack lunged forward, grabbing my wrist. Claire, don't do this. We can. I yanked my arm free. Goodbye, Jack. Then, I walked out of the house I once called home. But this time, I wasn't leaving in fear. I was leaving with a freedom I had never had before. I never knew that freedom could feel this light. After leaving Jack, I moved out of the house I once called home and into a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of New York. It wasn't extravagant, it wasn't flashy. Just a place that was mine. A place untouched by the control and manipulation I had endured for so long. The divorce happened faster than I expected. When I received the final papers confirming that I was no longer tied to Jack in any way, I sank into the old armchair in my apartment, took a sip of coffee, and breathed in deeply. I did it. I got out. Jack tried to contact me a few times after that. The late-night calls, the long, desperate messages begging me to reconsider. But I never answered. I had wasted too much time enduring him, enduring his family. It was time for me to live my own life. And that's exactly what I did, on my own terms. At first, I didn't know what to do with my inheritance. Suddenly, having $15 million in my bank account felt surreal. Almost unreal. But I knew one thing: I wasn't going to let it define me. I donated a portion of it to charities I believed in. Education programs, public libraries, and shelters for women escaping abusive relationships. I knew what it felt like to be trapped in a life controlled by someone else. And if I could help even one person break free, I would. The rest, I used to make a dream come true. I had always loved books. Not just because they allowed me to escape reality, but because they taught me things no one else could. And now, I had the chance to share that love with the world. I found a charming little building on a quiet street near my new neighborhood. With the help of a few architects, I transformed the space into a cozy bookstore, Robinson's Reads. Tall wooden shelves filled with both old and new books, a reading nook with armchairs and warm yellow lights for those who wanted to stay a while. I even added a small cafe counter where people could order a latte and lose themselves in the pages of a book. Before long, my bookstore became a beloved spot in the community, a child excitedly running in to find the latest comic book, an elderly man quietly picking out a classic novel, a young woman sipping coffee while flipping through a self-help book. I didn't need a luxurious life, I just needed this. A place that was mine, a job I loved, and the feeling that I was truly living, not just existing. One afternoon, as I was arranging a stack of newly arrived books, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, and a familiar name appeared. Doug. I stared at it for a long moment before sighing and pressing decline. I didn't need to hear anything else from him. The past was behind me, and I had no intention of going back. Pouring myself a cup of hot tea, I sank into the chair by the window, watching the afternoon sunlight spill across the bookshelves. This was my new life. A life I had chosen, no one else. Claire Robinson's story is not just about escaping a toxic marriage. It's a testament to the power of self-reliance and resilience. In reality, many people find themselves trapped in relationships where they gradually lose their voice and their sense of self, manipulated into submission. But like Claire, everyone has the right to stand up, set boundaries, and reclaim their own life. Money can change people's attitudes, but true worth isn't found in wealth. It's found in freedom, happiness, and the ability to control your own destiny. Claire Robinson's journey is one of empowerment and rediscovery. What do you think about her decision? If you were in her shoes, what would you have done? Share your thoughts, and don't forget to follow the channel for more inspiring stories about life and family.